At Thanksgiving dinner, my son and his wife told me to pack my things. You're a burden, dead weight. They said the kids needed my room. They had no idea I'd been paying the mortgage all along. I stayed calm, quietly planning my next move. Days later, the house was legally mine again, and they had 30 days to leave. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The golden scent of roasted turkey drifted through the air, but instead of comfort, it twisted my stomach with unease. I sat at what had once been my dining room table, listening to the sounds of my family around me. Michael's booming laugh rang from one end of the table. Lauren's higher-pitched giggle followed, and the playful chatter of Emma and Noah carried in from the living room. For anyone else, it would have seemed the perfect holiday evening. For me, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. At 68, my vision had faded to little more than shifting shadows. Faces were smudges, details lost to the fog of blindness. But this house needed no sight. I had memorized every creak in the floorboards, every corner, every doorway. For more than 30 years, it had been my world, where I raised Michael alone after his father's death, where I stitched together a life with more love than money, where laughter and sacrifice had filled the rooms in equal measure. I believed I would grow old here, surrounded by family and memories. That belief shattered the moment Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice cutting through the clatter of silverware and murmurs of holiday cheer. The tone was wrong, too sharp, too deliberate. My hands trembled as I set down my fork. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" The silence that followed told me everything before the words were even spoken. Then Lauren, dripping with satisfaction she could barely contain, leaned in. "Evelyn, we've been discussing this for months. It's time you considered other living arrangements." The words struck like a slap. I blinked hard, trying to steady the pounding in my chest. "Other living arrangements?" "You're becoming a burden," Lauren continued, her voice dressed in false sympathy. "And your medical bills, the endless doctor visits, the driving, the constant care. It's simply too much. We can't keep doing this." I pressed my palms to the edge of the table, forcing myself to stay composed. "I've paid my own medical expenses. I've never asked you." "That's not the point," Michael interrupted. The voice of my only child, the boy I had protected and nurtured through every storm, now joined in the attack. My breath caught. "You're a liability, Mom. What if you fall? What if you leave the stove on and burn the house down? We can't keep worrying." The air left my lungs as if he had punched me. I looked toward where his voice came from, but the blur that was my son no longer resembled the boy I had raised. "This is my home, Michael. I raised you here." Lauren's laugh sliced through me like glass. "Your home? Michael's been paying the mortgage for years. You haven't contributed anything but hospital bills and worry." Her lie tasted like poison. My throat tightened, and I could not force the truth out. That for 15 years I had quietly transferred money to cover those very payments. That I had placed the house in Michael's name to protect him when his business teetered. They didn't know. Worse, they didn't care. "We've already found a nice assisted living facility," Michael said, adopting the patronizing tone he saved for strangers in need of charity. "It's affordable and they'll help with your limitations." "You want to put me in a home?" My voice came out as little more than a whisper. "It's for the best," Lauren said firmly. "We can't keep supporting the blind old woman who only drags us down. The kids need the room for when they're older. We have to think about our future." Dead weight. That was the phrase she used, as though the woman who sacrificed her youth, her savings, her very life for her son was nothing but cargo to be tossed aside. The laughter of my grandchildren from the next room stabbed at me. They didn't know that their grandmother was being discarded like yesterday's trash. "We want you out by Monday," Lauren added, her voice smug, final. "The arrangements are made. The facility will send someone to collect you." I rose slowly, my legs trembling, but my voice steady. "I see. I suppose I should begin packing." "Good," Lauren replied with relief, as if victory had been sealed. Behind me, Michael added, "Mom, it really is for the best. You'll see." I didn't turn. If I did, they would see the tears cutting down my face. Worse, they might glimpse the calm settling over me, the dangerous calm that follows betrayal. They thought they had stripped me of dignity. They thought they were ridding themselves of a helpless old woman, but they had no idea what they had just awakened. In the solitude of my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed that had known both love and loneliness. My hand found my phone, fingers moving with steady purpose. I dialed the number I had not called in years. "Thomas, it's Evelyn," I said when the line clicked alive. My voice no longer shook. "I need to see you first thing Monday morning. It's time." The walls of Sunset Manor smelled of bleach and despair. The facility Lauren had praised as comfortable was nothing more than a rundown warehouse for forgotten souls. I lasted 6 hours before I called a cab, clutching the single suitcase they'd allowed me to bring. By the time the taxi dropped me at the small apartment I had hurriedly rented across town, I felt like I had been shoved into a prison cell. The space was clean but bare, stripped of everything that made a place a home. For the first time in decades, I felt truly displaced. I sat on the couch, if you could call it that, surrounded by boxes of hastily packed belongings. The silence pressed on me, heavier than the betrayal itself. I had always imagined that if the world turned against me, Michael would be the one to stand beside me. Instead, he had looked me in the eye, his laughter echoing in my ears, and agreed that I was nothing but dead weight. Dead weight. The phrase gnawed at me. How quickly they had forgotten the years of sacrifice. The sleepless nights when Michael was a boy struggling with asthma, and I stayed up counting his breaths in the dark. The long shifts at the accounting firm where I worked until my fingers cramped, just so he would never go hungry. The way I sold my jewelry after his father died, trading memories for grocery money, and the countless quiet transfers I made, month after month, to cover the mortgage they claimed he had been paying. My invisibility had been my own doing. I had erased myself so that Michael could shine. The most bitter irony was that he believed it. For 15 years, he thought the mortgage came straight from his account. He never questioned why it cleared so easily. He never noticed that his modest earnings could not possibly stretch to cover a home, 2 cars, business loans, and the endless comforts Lauren demanded. Pride blinded him, just as my failing eyes blinded me. But I was the one who held it all together, silently, faithfully. A vibration against my thigh pulled me from my thoughts. My phone lit up with a new message. "Lauren, hope you're settling in well at Sunset Manor. Michael says you left without telling anyone. Very inconsiderate." I stared at the words until my vision blurred further. Inconsiderate, as though abandoning me at a discount facility had been kindness, and leaving it was my crime. I deleted the message without responding. Let them believe I was still tucked away in their chosen exile. It would make what came next far sweeter. I opened the folder Thomas Green had given me years ago, the one I had kept hidden in the back of my dresser drawer. Inside were neat stacks of documents, each one a piece of truth that Michael and Lauren had never cared to discover. The deed to the Maple Street house, purchased in 1980, 2 years after my husband's death. The transfer into Michael's name when he turned 18 meant not as a surrender but as a shield, protecting him from creditors when he started his landscaping business. Bank records showing the monthly transfers from my retirement account into his, ensuring the mortgage was always paid. Contracts with my signature as cosigner. The business loans, the truck, the riding mowers, the trailer. Even the minivan Lauren bragged about to her friends, the one she used to ferry Emma and Noah to school and practice, had been financed through me. I had told Michael it was an early inheritance so he would not feel indebted. Invisible generosity. That was my sin. I had propped up their lives so completely that when I finally stopped, they mistook me for useless. The phone rang again. This time it was Michael. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Mom," he said, his tone clipped. "Lauren called the facility. They said you left. Where are you?" "I'm fine, Michael. I found somewhere else to stay." "You can't just disappear like that. We went through a lot of trouble setting that place up for you." "Did you?" My voice was steady, low. "Or did you just want me out of your way?" He sighed, irritation leaking through. "Mom, don't be dramatic. We did what was best for everyone." "You're being unreasonable." Unreasonable. After 34 years of giving up pieces of myself so he could live comfortably, I was unreasonable for refusing exile. I tightened my grip on the phone. I have to go, Michael. I have an appointment. An appointment? Mom, you can barely see. You shouldn't be going places alone. His voice carried a note of concern, but I knew better now. It wasn't love, it was liability. I'll be fine. Goodbye, Michael. I ended the call before he could speak again. For the first time, I felt something I had not felt in years: anticipation. The next morning, I would walk into Thomas Green's office, not as a mother willing to erase herself, but as a woman reclaiming what was hers. They thought they had rid themselves of a burden. Soon, they would learn the truth. The foundation of their comfortable life had never belonged to them at all. They thought they had discarded a blind old woman. In truth, they had awakened someone with more power than they could imagine. Thomas Green's office smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, the same as it had 2 decades earlier when he first became my financial advisor. But today, I did not come as the dutiful mother hiding her sacrifices. Today, I came as a woman who had endured betrayal and was ready to reclaim her life. Thomas looked at me across his mahogany desk, his gray eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Evelyn, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we start, there's no turning back. I adjusted the strap of my purse, feeling the familiar weight of the house keys still inside. Keys to a home that had been mine for decades, even if the deed no longer reflected it. My voice was steady. I've never been more certain of anything. He spread the documents before me, pages of dense text stamped with the official letterheads. Even with my blurred vision, I could sense the power they carried. Let's review, he said. You bought the Maple Street house in 1980 for $127,000. You transferred the deed to Michael in 2007 as a gift, but under state law, you retained what's called a life estate. That means you have the legal right to live there for the rest of your life. And more importantly, the right to revoke the transfer if certain conditions aren't met. What conditions? My voice was quiet, but my heart was pounding. That you be cared for and allowed to remain in the home. By forcing you out, Michael and Lauren violated the agreement. Legally, we can revoke the transfer immediately. For a moment, I closed my eyes. After years of being invisible, years of letting love silence me, I finally held something undeniable: power. And the mortgage, boss? I asked. Thomas tapped another stack of papers. We have 15 years of bank records showing transfers from your account to Michael's. That money covered every payment. We also have documentation of your co-signing his business loans, his truck loan, even the van Lauren drives. Without your backing, none of it would have been possible. I leaned forward, gripping the desk. And if I stop, then Michael will face all of it alone. Based on his current income and expenses, he'll default within 3 months. The truth washed over me in waves. Michael's sense of success, his pride in providing, the comfortable life Lauren flaunted, it had all been built on the foundation of my quiet sacrifices. Without me, it would crumble. There's more, Thomas said gently. I've reviewed Michael's recent activity. Lauren has been pressuring him to take out a home equity loan. Nearly $200,000 against the house. Cold anger stiffened my spine. What? The paperwork was submitted last week. If it's approved, they'll drain the equity you created with your payments. Once you were in a nursing home, they probably assumed no one would stop them. Stop it, I said, but my voice like stone. Do whatever it takes. I can file an injunction immediately, Thomas assured me. You are the true owner. You have every right to block it. I thought of Michael's voice on the phone the night before, impatient and annoyed that I'd left the facility, his concern not for me but for liability. While he dismissed me, Lauren schemed to cash in on my life's work. What else? I asked, my tone clipped. Thomas hesitated, then pulled another folder. There's one more matter. Your late husband's life insurance policy had a clause. If Michael ever abandoned or mistreated you, the remaining benefits revert to the estate. There's still $300,000 left. He turned 40 last month, but because of his actions, he's forfeited that inheritance. I let out a slow breath. For decades, I had lived as though my worth was hidden in shadows, but now the truth stood in daylight, undeniable. Michael had not only thrown me away, he had thrown away the very future I had built for him. Thomas slid a pen across the desk. Sign here, here, and here. Once these are filed, Michael will be notified that the property transfer has been revoked. Financial support ends immediately. My hand did not shake as I signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like a reclamation of dignity, of strength, of myself. How soon will it take effect? I asked. The deed revocation will be official within 48 hours. Financial transfers will stop tonight. I rose from my chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. Thank you, Thomas, for everything. He studied me with the weary kindness of a man who had seen too much. Evelyn, are you sure you don't want to explain it to Michael first? Perhaps he doesn't understand. I stopped at the door and turned back with a small, certain smile. I've spent 15 years explaining my worth through action. He chose not to see it. Now he'll learn to see it through my absence. When I stepped out of that office, the air felt different. For decades, I had walked under the weight of invisible sacrifice. Now I walked into a future where my worth was undeniable. They believed they had discarded me. Instead, they had set me free. And to anyone listening, remember this. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, hidden, waiting for the right moment to rise. If this story stirs something inside you, don't turn away. Share it, keep listening, and see how far strength can carry a soul once it refuses to be invisible. Word count. Hoj 894. 3 days later, my phone rang just after dawn. The sound pierced the quiet of my apartment, though I had been awake for hours waiting. I knew the legal notices had been delivered that morning. I knew whose name would appear on the screen. Hello, Michael, I said evenly when I answered. His voice was sharp, panicked. Mom, what the hell is going on? I just got some papers saying you're taking back the house. This has to be a mistake. I set down my coffee cup with care, savoring the control in my voice. It isn't a mistake. What do you mean? This is my house. I've been paying the mortgage for years. A bitter smile touched my lips. Have you, Michael? Have you really? Yes, the money comes out of my account every month. And where do you think that money came from? Silence stretched between us, heavy and jagged. I could almost hear him searching for an explanation that did not exist. Mom, what are you talking about? For 15 years, I said slowly, I've been transferring money into your account to cover the mortgage. You never qualified for a loan that size. I co-signed and I paid, not you. His voice cracked. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? When was the last time you studied your bank statements? When was the last time you questioned why everything always seemed to work out so perfectly? More silence, longer this time. Then I heard Lauren in the background, her voice shrill and demanding. What's happening, Michael? What is she saying? Even if the truth pierced him, Michael clung to denial. Even if that's true, you can't just take the house back. We live here. Your grandchildren live here. I can, I said, calm as stone. And I have. You made it clear on Thanksgiving that I was no longer welcome. You called me dead weight. Your wife said you couldn't afford to support a useless old woman. So I removed myself, and now I'm taking back what has always been mine. Mom, we were trying to do what was best for everyone. No, I cut in. You were doing what was easiest for you. That isn't the same. Lauren's voice rose as she yanked the phone from him. This is ridiculous. You can't just steal our house because your feelings got hurt. I'm not stealing anything, I replied coldly. I'm reclaiming what I built, what I paid for. Michael's been paying for years. You have no right. Then answer me this, Lauren. How much do you think Michael actually makes from his landscaping business? That's none of your concern. It is when I've been subsidizing your lifestyle for over a decade. He brings in about $3,000 a month. Your mortgage alone is nearly $2,000. Add the truck payment, the equipment loans, your van, utilities, food, shopping. Tell me, Lauren, how does that math work? The silence on the line deepened. Finally, her voice came back, but the edge had dulled. You're lying. Pull out your bank statements. Trace the mortgage payments. Or better yet, check your balance. Those automatic deposits you've depended on stopped 3 days ago. I heard her gasp, followed by frantic whispering. Then Michael came back on the line, his voice suddenly smaller. Mom, if this is true, maybe we can work something out. We just need to talk. There's nothing to work out, I said. You made your choice when you threw me away. Now you'll live with it. But where will we go? We have children. The same question I asked myself when you told me to leave. You gave me 4 days. I'm giving you 30. Use them wisely. Lauren grabbed the phone again, her words hot with fury. You bitter old witch! You're destroying your own family. No, I said, my tone sharp enough to cut. I'm ending the illusion. I'm no longer building a life you pretend is yours. You'll have to live within reality now. Her breath hitched, and I knew she was crying, though it sounded more like rage than grief. I didn't wait for Michael's reply. 30 days, I repeated. After that, I moved back into my house. Goodbye. I hung up, my hand trembling, but not with fear. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a message. Lauren, of course, we'll fight this. You won't get away with destroying us. I typed a reply with steady fingers. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to keep building something that was never real. Then I blocked both their numbers. The hardest part was over. They had treated me like I was invisible, but now they would learn what it meant to live without the invisible support that had kept their world from collapsing. For the first time in decades, I breathed freely. The house, the finances, the power, they were mine again. And so was my dignity. The empire they built on my silence began to collapse. 2 weeks had passed since I cut off the lifeline, and for days I heard nothing. No calls, no knocks at my door, no messages except the one I had already blocked. At first, the quiet unsettled me. Then one evening, a knock rattled my apartment door. Through the peephole, I recognized the blurred outline of my son. Alone. No Lauren clinging to his arm. No children shielding him. Just Michael, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I opened the door slowly. His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, his face drawn with exhaustion. The man who once laughed in agreement as his wife cast me aside now looked like someone stripped bare. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I stepped aside and he entered as though the weight of the world pressed against his shoulders. He sank onto my couch, burying his face in his hands. I've been going through everything, he said, his words muffled. The bank statements, the loan documents, everything. I never realized. I sat across from him, my fingers folded tightly in my lap. I gave him space to unravel. The business loan, for my equipment. You co-signed the truck, Jessica's van, even the credit cards we use for groceries. Your name is there. You carried all of it. And the mortgage? His voice cracked again. God, Mom, you've been paying our mortgage for 15 years. How did I not know? Because you never looked, I said softly. You never questioned why everything always worked out. You believed in your success because it was easier than facing the truth. Tears filled his eyes as he finally lifted his head. Why didn't you tell me? I leaned forward. Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you had known? He opened his mouth, then stopped. The silence between us was louder than any confession. I pressed further. Lauren already convinced you to exile me. If you had known I paid for her precious van, her shopping trips, the roof over her head, do you think she would have treated me with respect? Or would she have twisted it into entitlement? He swallowed hard. She left, he admitted. Left? Yesterday, she took Emma and Noah and went to her mother's in Phoenix, said she wasn't going to stick around for financial ruin. A stab of pain shot through me. Not for her, but for my grandchildren. They were innocent, caught in the storm of their parents' greed and weakness. She cleaned out our joint account, he continued bitterly. What little was left anyway. Turns out we've been living paycheck to paycheck for years, even with your help. Jessica was spending money we didn't have on things we didn't need. And now, his voice dropped. Now I'm staring at losing everything. The business equipment will be repossessed if I can't make the payments. I'll have to close the company. I don't know where I'll live after the 30 days are up. For a moment, my heart wanted to reach out, to fold him into my arms, to promise that everything would be all right. That was the mother in me, the woman who had spent her life fixing his mistakes. But there was a new part of me now, a woman who had learned what happened when love became enabling. Michael, I asked quietly, why are you here? He lifted his tear-stained face, his eyes pleading. I'm here to apologize. For Thanksgiving, for calling you a burden, for letting Lauren speak to you the way she did. I was wrong, I see that now. His voice faltered. I'm begging you. Forgive me. And maybe we can work something out. Some kind of arrangement where I can keep the house and the business. And you, his eyes searched mine desperately. You can come back home, where you belong. There it was. Even now, even after his illusions had crumbled, he still thought this was a negotiation. He still believed my worth could be measured in what I could offer him. I stood, walking toward the small window that overlooked the parking lot. My voice was calm, almost gentle. Do you know what hurt me most at Thanksgiving, Michael? He shook his head. It wasn't being called dead weight. It wasn't even being thrown out of my own home. It was watching my son, the boy I raised, the man I supported every day of his adult life, sit there and laugh while his wife stripped me of my dignity. You didn't just agree with her, you laughed. He pressed his fists to his forehead. I was trying to keep the peace. Jessica can be persuasive. She kept saying having you there was holding us back, that we had to think about our future. Your future, I said sharply, built on my sacrifices, my money, my name, my silence. You didn't know that then, but you know it now, so tell me, what would you do differently? The room was silent except for the sound of his shallow breathing. When he finally spoke, his words were broken. I don't know. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. I turned back to face him. Then that is your answer. You don't know. And until you do, there is nothing to work out. The house is mine. The business is yours to lose. And as for me, my voice steadied with conviction. For the first time in my life, I choose myself. Michael broke down in tears. I let them fall. I would not clean them up this time. They thought casting me aside would erase me. Instead, it awakened me. And if you've been following my story, don't look away now, because what happens when the blind woman returns home will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and strength. Stay with me. Share this story and let others see what happens when silence finally ends. Michael's apology lingered in the room long after he left, like the echo of a storm that had finally broken. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the weight of his tears pressing against my chest, but I did not crumble under it. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to soften his fall. I didn't offer solutions or reassurance. I simply let him sit with the consequences of choices he had made. I had spent decades teaching him, without words, that my worth was invisible. Every sacrifice unspoken, every dollar transferred in secret, every favor disguised as his own accomplishment. I thought I was giving him freedom. In truth, I had taught him to mistake my silence for insignificance. He believed my contributions were nothing because I had never demanded they be acknowledged. As I moved through the quiet apartment, I touched the boxes stacked in the corner. My belongings, my life reduced to a few cartons of clothes, books, and framed photos. But unlike the day I first arrived here, I no longer felt displaced. The space, though bare, felt like a transition rather than a prison. My exile was no longer a wound, it was a doorway. Michael's voice echoed in my head, trembling with desperation. What can I do? How can I make this right? The answer had come to me with surprising clarity. He could not fix what had already been broken. He could not erase the laughter that had cut me deeper than any insult, nor the sightless betrayal in his eyes as he sided with Lauren. What he could do was learn, stand on his own, live without me cushioning every fall. Only then might there be space for forgiveness. The next morning, I stood before the mirror in the bathroom, studying the blur of my reflection. My vision was little more than shifting shapes and colors, but I traced the outline of my face with my fingertips. The woman staring back at me was no longer the same Evelyn who had sat quietly at a Thanksgiving table while her son and his wife stripped her of dignity. This woman had signed papers that cut the ties of dependency. This woman had told her son she chose herself. For the first time in 68 years, I felt the truth of it. I mattered. When Michael called again later that week, his voice was small, hesitant. Mom, about the house, is there any way I can still keep it? Maybe we could arrange something. No, I interrupted gently but firmly. I'm moving back. That house is mine. You may visit, but only if you can treat me with respect. Only if you can look at me as the woman who made your life possible, not the burden you convinced yourself I was. Silence stretched across the line. Then, in a voice full of resignation, he said, I understand. It struck me how different that silence felt from the one at Thanksgiving. Back then, silence had been suffocating, laced with betrayal. Now silence carried the weight of recognition, of truth finally acknowledged. After we hung up, I lowered myself into the armchair by the window. Tears welled up, but they weren't the tears of loss that had stung my eyes weeks before. These were tears of relief. Of release. For the first time in my life, I had chosen not to disappear for someone else's comfort. I had chosen to stand where I belonged, even if that meant standing alone. The days that followed were filled with quiet strength. I met with Thomas again to finalize the paperwork, ensuring that the house, the finances, every last thread of security was firmly in my hands. He looked at me differently now, not as the client who always put her son first, but as a woman who had finally stepped into her own authority. Evelyn, he said as we closed the folder of completed documents, you've done something many parents never have the courage to do. You've drawn a line. Yes, I replied, and I will not step back over it. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I sat in the stillness and thought about what lay ahead. In less than a month, I would walk through the front door of my house again, not as a shadow lingering at the edge of someone else's life, but as the rightful owner. Michael and Lauren had mistaken my silence for weakness. Now they would see me for who I truly was. I touched the keys in my purse, the cool metal pressing into my palm. Those keys had once felt like dead weight, relics of a life stolen from me. Now they were symbols of return, of reclamation. For years, I had believed my role was to sacrifice quietly, to keep peace, to never ask for anything in return. But peace without respect is not peace. Sacrifice without acknowledgement becomes erasure. I was done erasing myself. As the evening settled around me, I allowed myself one long, steady breath. The hardest part was not losing my family. It was realizing I had already lost them years ago, when love became conditional and gratitude disappeared. But now I was finding something far more precious than their approval. I was finding myself. I thought I had lost everything. Instead, I was about to find myself. 6 months had passed since that bitter Thanksgiving, and the house on Maple Street no longer felt like a battlefield. It was mine again, my sanctuary, transformed with each careful choice I made. The locks had been changed the day I returned, not out of spite, but necessity. The old door that once opened to judgment and ridicule now opened to peace. Sunlight spilled through new curtains in colors I loved, not ones chosen to please anyone else. Michael's old bedroom, stripped of resentment and chaos, had become my art studio. I could still see shapes, still sense the brilliance of color, and the feel of paint beneath my fingers brought me a joy I hadn't known I was missing. For the first time in decades, I created something that was mine alone. My mornings began in the garden, coffee warming my hands as the sunrise painted the sky. My vision blurred the edges, but I could still recognize the pinks and golds that whispered of renewal. For so long, my life had been measured in what I gave away. Now it was measured in what I allowed myself to keep. Michael called once a week. Our conversations were cautious, stripped of entitlement, weighed down with lessons he was still learning. He had lost the landscaping business, as I knew he would. He had taken a job with the city's parks department, modest but steady. His pride was no longer built on illusion, but on effort. For the first time, he was living within his means. Good morning, Mom, he said one Tuesday, his voice softer than I remembered. I wanted to let you know I got the apartment downtown. It's small, but it's clean, and I can pay for it myself. That's wonderful, Michael, I told him, pride blooming quietly in my chest. He laughed, though it was a little broken. It's strange to feel proud of something so simple, just paying my own rent. But it feels real. Real accomplishments usually do. My dough, I answered. He spoke of therapy, of unraveling the ways he had let dependency and denial shape his life. He spoke of Emma and Noah, how he planned to move closer to them when he had saved enough. The pain of their absence was sharp in my chest, but I held on to hope that someday those children would know me not as a burden, but as the grandmother who found her strength. Late one evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery man with a bouquet of lilies and roses. The card read, "Mom, thank you for teaching me that real strength comes from standing on your own. Love, Michael." I placed them in a vase on the dining table, the same table where I had once been told I was worthless. Now it was a place of beauty again. Even the neighbors had changed in my eyes. Susan Miller, a widow who lived next door, often stopped by for coffee. She had become a dear friend, her companionship reminding me that I was not alone, not invisible. We laughed, we shared stories, we made plans for small adventures. With her and others from the community center, I hosted dinners, joined a book club, filled the rooms of my house with conversation that warmed instead of wounded. One afternoon, Susan leaned across my kitchen table and whispered with the delight of gossip, "Evelyn, you'll never guess. Someone saw Lauren at the mall arguing with a man about money. Seems her new life isn't as smooth as she hoped." I smiled faintly, no bitterness left in me. "That doesn't surprise me." "You're too kind," Susan said. Not kindness," I replied, "just clarity. Holding on to anger only weighs me down. She's living the consequences of her choices. That's punishment enough." In those months, I learned something more important than anything else. I was good company. I was interesting. I was valuable, not for what I could give, but for who I was. For decades, I had disappeared inside sacrifice. Now I lived in the fullness of myself. Every room of my house became a testament to survival. The kitchen where I once cooked for an ungrateful family was now where I experimented for my own joy. The living room where I had been dismissed was now filled with friends who valued my words. The dining room where I had been called dead weight now held flowers from a son who was finally beginning to see me. I thought betrayal would end me. Instead, it freed me. And if my journey has stirred something inside you, don't stop here. Share this story, keep listening, because what comes next will remind you that no matter how deeply you've been broken, there is always a way to rise. Life in the house grew softer with each passing week. What had once been a place of tension and whispered contempt had become a sanctuary filled with the sound of laughter, the hum of friendship, and the quiet rhythm of solitude I had chosen for myself. I had joined a book club at the community center, a circle of women who carried stories in their eyes and kindness in their voices. We gathered around my dining table on Thursday evenings, glasses of wine, catching the light, as we debated novels and shared pieces of ourselves. For years, that room had been where I was belittled, where my voice was dismissed. Now it rang with discussion, warmth, and respect. The kitchen, once a place where I cooked under the sharp gaze of Lauren's judgment, had become mine again. I experimented freely, baking bread that filled the house with the comforting scent of yeast, simmering soups that warmed me from the inside out. Each meal I prepared for myself tasted of freedom. Each dish shared with friends carried the flavor of belonging. Susan Miller became a constant presence in my days. She would tap on my back door just after noon, bringing gossip from the grocery store or a jar of homemade jam. Together we walked the garden paths, her hands steadying me when mine faltered, my laughter steadying her when loneliness crept in. She reminded me that I was not invisible, that companionship could be found in the simplest acts of care. One afternoon, Susan leaned close as we sipped tea at my kitchen table. "You'll want to hear this," she said, her eyes glinting with the thrill of small-town news. "Someone saw Lauren at the mall. She was arguing with a man loud enough for half the store to hear. Apparently, her new life isn't going the way she planned." I set down my cup, a calmness settling over me. "That doesn't surprise me." Susan frowned. "You're not angry? After everything she put you through?" "Anger only chains me to her," I answered. "She's living the consequences of her choices. That's punishment enough." It struck me then how different I felt. Months earlier, my heart would have burned with bitterness at the thought of Lauren thriving. Now I didn't care if she thrived or faltered. My happiness was no longer tied to her downfall. It was tied only to my freedom. Painting filled the hours between my mornings in the garden and evenings with friends. My studio overflowed with canvases, landscapes of blurred color, bold strokes that spoke more of emotion than detail. Though my vision limited me, it did not cage me. The textures beneath my fingertips carried stories my eyes could no longer tell. Each painting was a declaration. I am still here. I am still creating. Michael's calls grew steadier. The first weeks had been awkward, weighed down with guilt and shame. But slowly our conversation shifted. He spoke of his job at the Parks Department, of the pride he felt coming home tired from honest work. He spoke of budgeting, of learning to stretch what little he had instead of depending on invisible help. For the first time in his life, he was carrying his own weight. I talked to Emma on a video call, he told me once, his voice breaking with emotion. She lost her first tooth. She told me she wanted to save the tooth fairy money to help me buy a bigger house. My throat tightened, tears burning behind my eyes. She's only 7, I whispered. I know, he said, and already she's more thoughtful than I ever was. The pain of missing my grandchildren was sharp, but it was softened by the knowledge that Michael was trying. He was beginning to understand what I had carried for him all those years. He was learning the value of sacrifice, not the entitled kind he had once expected, but the honest kind that comes from labor and responsibility. Some nights, after hanging up the phone, I walked through my house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the curtains I had chosen myself. Each room whispered back to me, no longer echoing with words that belittled, but with memories I was building anew. The loneliness I once feared had been replaced with solitude that nourished me. I had discovered something profound in those quiet months. I was good company. I was interesting. I was valuable, not because I gave endlessly, but because I existed. I filled my own space, I made my own joy, I painted my own life onto the canvas of each day. And when I thought back to the woman who had sat at that Thanksgiving table, trembling with shame, I barely recognized her. She had been erased by her own silence. I was not her anymore. I was Evelyn Carter, whole, seen, and finally, free. The morning light spilled across my garden, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gold. I sat with a cup of coffee, warming my hands. The quiet around me filled not with loneliness, but with peace. 6 months earlier, I had walked away from Thanksgiving dinner with tears on my face and betrayal heavy in my chest. Now I sat in the same house, whole again, and unshakably free. The rooms bore no trace of the contempt that once poisoned them. The dining room, where I had been told I was worthless, now echoed with laughter from my book club and the clink of wine glasses shared with women who valued my words. The living room, where I had been silenced, was alive with conversation, stories, and music. The kitchen, where I once cooked under Lauren's scorn, smelled of fresh bread and herbs from my garden, meals crafted for my own joy. Everywhere I turned, I found reminders of the woman I had become. My art studio overflowed with canvases, bold strokes of color layered with emotion. My eyesight blurred the details, but my hands painted what my heart saw. Freedom, resilience, and beauty carved from pain. Michael called regularly now. Each conversation felt like stitching together a fabric torn beyond repair, though I knew the seams would always show. He spoke less of excuses and more of accountability. He had lost much, his business, his marriage, his illusions, but he was learning to build with what remained. One morning, his voice carried something different, quiet pride. Mom, I signed the lease on an apartment. It's small, but it's mine. I can afford it without anyone else's help. That's wonderful, Michael, I told him, my voice steady with affection. I know it's late, but I'm learning. I want you to be proud of me. I am proud, I said, and this time the words were true. Not because he depended on me, but because he was finally standing on his own. Emma and Noah remained in Phoenix with Lauren, but Michael was determined to rebuild his place in their lives. He told me about video calls, about Emma's missing tooth, about Noah's drawings taped to his refrigerator. Each story was a reminder of the innocent lives touched by choices far bigger than they understood. Someday, I hope to sit with them again, to let them know their grandmother had always loved them, even when distance kept us apart. One evening, as I stood in my garden, watching the last light fade, the doorbell rang. A delivery man handed me a bouquet of flowers, their colors vibrant even through my failing sight. The card read, Mom, thank you for teaching me that real strength comes from standing on your own. Love, Michael. I placed them in a vase at the center of my dining table, where months earlier I had been stripped of dignity. Now the same table glowed with symbols of growth, apology, and fragile hope. Susan visited the next day with another piece of news. I saw Lauren, she said as she set down a basket of fresh peaches. She was arguing with a man in the parking lot, something about money. Seems her new life isn't as golden as she thought. I stirred sugar into my tea, calm and unshaken. That doesn't surprise me. Susan studied me. You don't feel anger? I smiled faintly. Anger would keep me tied to her. I let go of that the moment I chose myself. She lives with her choices. I live with mine. That night, as I settled into bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Betrayal had not ended my life. It had revealed it. For decades, I had been invisible, my worth hidden behind sacrifice. It took being discarded to see myself clearly. I was not dead weight. I was not a burden. I was a woman who had carried generations, who had built a life brick by quiet brick, who had rediscovered her own strength when everyone else tried to erase it. And now I live for myself. To those who have listened to my story, remember this. Some people wait their whole lives to be valued by others. I learned the most important person to value me was myself. If my journey has touched your heart, share it. Let it remind someone else that it is never too late to reclaim dignity, never too late to choose yourself, never too late to rise.